Hey guys, it's Jeremy with Career Lab. Today I'm talking to Brendan Yan about his experience as a management consultant. Brendan studied industrial engineering as an undergrad at West Virginia University, and then he worked 1 year as a business analyst for Accenture, and after that 3 years for a boutique consulting firm. He's since changed his line of work, which is great because he's able to give us an honest overview of the industry. If you're curious about management consulting, but you're not quite sure what the job entails, then I'm pretty sure you'll like this video. As always, I've included bookmarks in the description, so you can skip ahead to the questions that interest you most. And if you like these types of career videos, then make sure to subscribe to the channel so you stay updated when I post the next video. All right, let's get to the interview. So can you dive deeper a little into consulting? A lot of people, they kind of know what it is, but not really. So can you, kind of give us an overview of what you did as a consultant? And
So consulting in itself can be a vague term. You can consult on anything. I think when most people think about consulting, they think about management / strategy type consulting. So the kind of McKinsey, Bain, BCG of the world, or Accenture or Deloitte, and a lot of these other companies that also provide that. But companies like Accenture and Deloitte provide various types of consulting. They have IT type of consulting, and they have like tax work and things like that. So the field that I was in is like your management strategy consulting type of stuff. And it's really interesting field. It's you get to do a variety of different things. You work for different industries. You travel a lot. You kind of see the inner workings of a business from a really high level, and you can do that at a really young age. You have to do a lot in Excel. You do a lot with data and analytics. So I think that's one area you need to be strong at to go into consulting. And for me, something I traveled, all across the U.S. Sometimes it was in the really cool cities. Sometimes it was the middle of nowhere. You can't really control that. I spent 4 months in Dubai in 2008, which is a really interesting time to be there. Did some international stuff overall.
Nice. Can you talk about specific projects you worked on and what exactly you were doing like on the day-to-day? And I know consulting can vary a lot.
Yeah.
Can we kind of get into more detail about that?
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing about consulting is there's kind of two ways that projects tend to go. So if it's a good economic time, you're typically on like growth type of projects. So I worked for companies like Pepsi was one of my clients, and they were looking at what are new regions that they should be expanding to, or spending more money on focusing on different products, because Pepsi doesn't just own Pepsi, they own Frito-Lay, they own Gatorade, they own Tropicana, they own all these other different big brands. So in good economic times, it's how do we grow more and how do we figure out kind of strategies around that. You'll dive deep into each of these specific types of things depending on what the project's about. And then in bad economic times, which I also went through that cycle post 2008, we actually were still very busy as a consulting firm, but it was much more how do we go in and help companies cut costs. So it's much more operationally, it's supply chain. So actually one of the companies that I worked with was Starbucks. And it was for them, they were so used to just having successful quarter after quarter. Post 2008, they had to figure out how they could, figure out their cost structure in a better way. So we looked at some of their in-store operations, we looked at their warehouse, how they distribute to stores. So it becomes a lot more operation, supply chain type focused, and figuring out how they can optimize the cost side of their business. As opposed to like in good economic times, it's how do we figure out how to grow more, how do we market better, how do we price things in a different way, and diving into even some of the specific types of projects or type of work that I did. There was for example, I did maybe 3 projects with a company called Pernod Ricard, which is a bit large wine and spirits company. Yeah. And so I did one around just pricing of different products. If they ran promotions on, the 750 milliliter versus the 1.75, how did that in certain states, because each state is regulated differently, how did that affect sales, and should they be promoting certain products or should they not?
Okay, so let's take that example. They do what, like whiskey or
sure,
a bunch of spirits, right?
Yes.
So you were trying to figuring out the pricing or like the quantity in each bottle that should be in each bottle. How are you doing that?
Yeah, so we would get sales data from every state runs kind of like independently in the U.S. Each state has its own regulations and how they sell and what they can do. So let's say you had Jameson whiskey, and so they have the 750 milliliter bottle of Jameson whiskey that they'll charge $24.99 for in Illinois, let's say, and let's say for a 3-week period, they put that on promotion to $21.99. And then basically we would see, when this product was on promotion, we would get sales data to see, and we start to match up, like correlate data to say, like, when it went up, when you decrease your price $3 or whatever 10 or 15%, did it lift sales by X amount, by 10 or 15%? If it didn't, maybe you shouldn't even promote this in the first place, because there's the elasticity of the consumer doesn't matter. They don't care if it's on sale or not. They still want to buy Jameson because that's a top brand for them.
Got it.
But if it is something like, I would maybe buy this, but since it's on sale, I'm definitely going to buy it.
Yeah.
So then it would drive more sales. So we looked at a lot of data. Most of what you're doing in consulting, honestly, especially as a junior person, is crunching a bunch of numbers.
And that's in Excel, right?
In Excel, typically, and then creating insights out of that. So making sense of all these numbers and finding different interesting analytics that you found, like, we did see when this was on promotion here, this drove X amount of sales, so you should do more of that promotion, for example. So you provide a lot of the insights and recommendations based on the analysis that you do.
Got it. And so for that specific project, how many people were working with the company?
Yeah, so the typical project, and I think that one was about 4 people.
Only 4?
Yeah,
oh, okay.
on that pricing project.
Okay.
And this is, so I'm speaking more, I guess, and even I think Accenture, I think the projects can really even last from anywhere from 2 to, or it can be, I think, between 2 and 10 people maybe on average. Okay. I'd say the average project is probably around 5 or around 5.
I thought 5 was more. That's.
But then there's also there's people on the ground, the everyday people, and then there might be a partner who sold it in, but he's doing a bunch of other things and maybe stops by every once in a while. But
so you're working on this project full time for a couple months usually?
Yeah. So in some firms will have you work on multiple projects at the same time, but I think it's more standard that you focus. This is, let's say it's a 8-week project or a 12-week project, 4 people, 8 to 12 weeks. You do that. You have maybe a check-in meeting. 1 month in, you have another 1 month, and then you have a final presentation to show okay, if it's pricing, here's how you should price in every market, here's our recommendation, or if it's cost cutting, you should cut this, this, and this, and that will save you $50 million over the course of the next 2 years, because, whatever that may be. And so typically, leading into each of these meetings, the partner maybe will be more active and more involved and provide more guidance. And there's a project manager type of person who kind of is leading the day-to-day as well. And then...
So that's interesting. So how is this team structured? So 5 to 10, about 5 to 10. How's it structured? How many junior people and how many more senior people?
Yeah, so typically, there's going to be a partner who sold it, and depending if it's maybe a new client, they might be really actively engaged, and maybe they're even on site all the time. You'll have that kind of the senior leader, and then you'll have essentially in every firm will have different names for these titles of who they are, but an engagement manager type of person will typically lead the day-to-day, and will lead the team of maybe 3 to 4 others that are different levels of analyst to associate to whatever, and typically each person is essentially owning some aspect of it. So it might be hey Brandon, you should look into I don't know, Jameson, I'll focus just on the Jameson brand, where somebody else will focus on the Absolute brand, and then we'll each come in, bring our insights, and we'll tell a story around that. And then that comes together in a larger deck. Ultimately, it becomes a final presentation that says, okay, here's what we do here, and then and each of those will combine to create some larger insight. Typically, that will be more of a focus.
And usually the more senior person is the one that's kind of pitching the whole, the junior people are doing all the crunching the numbers and preparing even the slide deck sometimes, and then the more senior person will be pitching that to the company or to whoever's the point of contact there, right?
Yes, and typically we were at all those meetings with the senior people, and it was great because you get to meet them. You're not typically the one running the presentation, but there's times where you may be chiming in. They might say, what is this, with this number? And then the partner may not even have those intimate details.
Yeah, you're the expert on that.
Yeah, so Brandon, can you chime in about this? Yeah. And so you're typically, and it's not always depending, but you're typically at the meetings, at the big meetings, even as a junior person. You're there to contribute if asked upon, but you're not the one that needs to deliver, that larger presentation.
Nice. So what are other things that those more senior people do? Are those the people you're saying that have multiple projects and they're not on the site 24/7. There'd be
Yeah.
multiple projects, right?
Yeah, so the interesting evolution of a person in consulting, and I left before I got to that top stage is, you typically start as kind of like an analyst. You're a number cruncher. Then maybe you're starting to manage some analysts.
What are the periods for that? Like how long does it take usually?
I mean,
like on average.
Yeah, I mean it can depend. Obviously, if you're really good, you can move up really fast. If you're not as good, you'd probably be a bit slower. I think it's typically like a couple of years in each
like
position.
2-3 years.
Yeah,
Okay.
like 2-3 years maybe as an analyst, and then as an associate, and then like associate can be like post MBA if you come in post MBA. And again, every firm has slightly different names for these, and then there might be like a manager, or like principal, and then like partner, or each one will have slightly different variations of the name. But typically, it's like you're very deep in the numbers. The younger you are, then you start to kind of manage that. You're probably still involved in number crunching. And even you're creating Excel. So you really have to be good at Excel and PowerPoint, no matter what. I think in any level. But the higher up you become, the less you're kind of deep in the Excel sheet, and the more you have to sell. Mm-hmm. Then it becomes like, okay, I have to figure out why this project is compelling. I have to pitch that. I have to build relationships with, let's say, with Starbucks, for example, or with whomever, and convince them that we do a great job and they should hire us to do their next consulting project. And then you want to, typically the hardest part I felt like is like when we had a new client, we had to work extra hard, to really impress them, because we had to build their trust.
Yeah.
And then once they know who you are and the quality of the firm, then it becomes I wouldn't say much easier, but a bit easier, because it's more of a comfort level in doing that. But yeah, I would say like the evolution is the higher up you become, you need to be able to, you have to sell, you have to build relationships. But the one I guess overall kind of reason I end up leaving consulting is it can be very taxing on your lifestyle. So you work a lot of hours. Any professional services job is going to be like that, because you're always doing whatever to please the client. Mm-hmm. And so
how many hours were you working on average?
Probably. There's also spikes leading up to a meeting. You might be working 80, 100-hour weeks. If you're kind of a slower period and you just finished a meeting, maybe it's like 50, 60.
So 50 was like on the lower side.
Yeah, and the only other time you're not is like maybe if you're in between projects. Maybe you just finished a project and you have to get staffed on the next one.
That would be like a week.
Maybe it depends on how well the firm's doing, but for me it was always very short.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, it could be like a week, and then then it's like a little bit more chill. It's almost relaxing. They call it like on the beach is like the term for it.
So is that why you left, just the hours, or was there anything else?
No, I mean, it wasn't necessarily just the hours. It was, so what I saw in the reason the hours, even though at that age probably wasn't that big a deal to me still, because I was young, I was single, it didn't matter, I didn't have a family, I could travel, I could do all kinds of stuff. But the partners themselves, from at least the firms I was at, they seemed to be working just the same amount of hours as we were. So it
doesn't get better.
So it didn't seem like it got better, and I felt like especially, and maybe, maybe you can change that, as you become older, but like, I felt like it didn't get much better. They traveled all the time, they worked a lot, and if they have, a wife, and if they are a husband, and they have kids, like, you don't see them very often. So I just felt like that wasn't necessarily the path that I wanted to go down. There's the lifestyle side, and then there's also, I would say, it's the perfect job, I think, when you're young, because you get involved in very high level strategic conversations at big companies, and you get to see kind of the inner workings of businesses, and you learn a ton.
So you do recommend that for like people that are just coming out of undergrad?
I think if I could do it all over again, I would do the same thing. I would work 4 years in consulting. I thought it was great.
Okay.
I would recommend it. But the con of that is, you learn probably more in that time period than you would on almost any other job. Is that you're never actually the one doing anything though. You're just like crunching numbers, you give advice, and then you go on to the next project, and you don't even see the outcome of that. Did they even implement what advice you said? You don't actually do much of that output. Yeah. You're just always an advisor.
Trenches.
Yeah, you're like telling them and recommending them what to do, but you don't actually execute on doing any of that. And a lot of times you don't even see necessarily what the outcome of it is.
And that can be frustrating.
Yeah, especially if you want to actually be more hands-on. It's great, I think, if you want to just think about problems and solve them, which was something that I was very interested in, and something that I even miss somewhat today. Even I liked that aspect of it. But if you want to get your hands dirty and actually like have ownership and see something go through, the consulting is probably not that, you're not going to find that necessarily there.
So, I mean, you mentioned about the problem solving. That's something interesting because, so a lot of engineers end up in consulting? Would you say, like, what were, like, your colleagues, were they more, like, from a business background or from an engineering background, and which one seemed like a better fit for the career?
Yeah, so there was a mix. The firm I spent more of my time at, Mars and Company, liked to bring in engineers because they were very analytical. So the engineers tend to be obviously more smart in math and problem solving and all of that type of stuff.
Mars, did they do the candy bars? Is that,
no, it's separate. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was just like there was a guy named Dominique Mars who started the company,
Okay.
And he was
just like a standard like consultant.
Yeah, he was like a former BCG partner that created Mars and Company. It's just like his own smaller boutique strategy firm.
Got it.
Yeah, so
they like to bring in engineers.
They like engineers, but honestly, like, it doesn't necessarily matter because it's when they interview, you go through a case study, and that's essentially a trial to see how well you think on your feet. Can you solve problems that people hypothetically give to you?
Yeah.
And while there probably was a higher percentage of engineers that I worked with, there's definitely business people. There's like people who were history majors that that they were just good at problem solving that would be a good fit regardless of what their major was. So that was kind of the cool thing about consulting too, even though it does tend to skew a little bit heavier towards maybe business or engineering, is that there's people from any major. You don't have to have a specific major in order to
you have to
it.
like to solve problems, basically.
Yeah.
Well, I think we covered most of what I want to cover today. Do you have any parting thoughts or words or advice for anyone that's watching?
I think just find what you're interested in, and then, and if you're not sure, just get involved. Like, consulting, I think is a perfect career if you're not sure what you want to do, because you get to learn and try a variety of different things. And then ultimately find whatever that is that you're interested in and pursue that and go down that path. For me, it's very much like a problem solving thing. And even as I chose post-engineering, post-consulting, I felt like the business development roles I'm in are very problem solving driven, but it's externally. I wanted to be externally focused.
Yeah.
You could be going to be a product manager, for example, and that's also a lot of problem solving, but it's more internally focused and figuring out what is it that you want to be, what do you want to be doing with your career.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time today. I hope that was helpful, guys, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.